Hi everyone, welcome to the Digital Supply Chain Podcast. My name is Tom Raftery, and with me on the show today, I have my special guest, Graham. Graham, welcome to the podcast. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. My name's Graham Scott. I'm responsible for direct procurement at Jabil. Been with Jabil now for close to 20 years, based in Florida, as you can probably tell by the accent. Started off in the UK, moved over to Florida 2007, had a 5-year sabbatical in Singapore, and now I'm back here in the US. So glad to be here. Direct procurement for Jabil or global procurement. Really, that entails multiple functions. I'm responsible for the global commodity management team, our supplier relationship management team, our centralized procurement team, and our centralized quotes team, as well as any digital requirements that we have, i.e. platform solutions, applications, etc., across the breadth of the team.
Okay, and for people who might be unaware, Graham, give us a few words about Jabil. Who or what are Jabil? What kind of size, scale, markets, industries, etc.?
Yeah, of course. So Jabil's a really large company. We're really the brand behind the brand. We are we finished last fiscal year just around $33 billion. We have 250,000 employees around the world. We have 100 manufacturing locations across 30 countries. When we think about markets, we probably cover just about every market sector that has any type of electronic content in it. And, from a customer perspective, we're fortunate enough to have 400 of the world's largest brands as our customers. So, from anything from a handheld product to some of the largest pieces of industrial equipment or healthcare equipment that you would see in your everyday life. So very, very broad.
Okay. And your role then, we touched on it just briefly at the start, but can you give us a little more in-depth about what it is you and your organization do for Jabil?
Yeah, so from a procurement perspective, we're part of the supply chain organization, but just purely thinking about procurement. Global commodity management, that team is responsible for every component that goes onto a PCB that then becomes part of a PCBA that's used in any of those products that I mentioned before. So we have 4 dedicated teams, one that manages PCBs, one that manages semiconductors, one on passive components, including connectors, switches, and relays, and a distribution team as well to help manage probably close to $15 billion of spend. Their primary focus is on component costs, trying to understand what's going on in the market. So thinking about supply chain resiliency, etc., negotiating contracts, the usual stuff that you would associate with a commodity management team. To complement that team, a few years ago, we developed a supplier relationship management team. The core purpose of that organization was to get us closer to, 100 or so key suppliers within our ecosystem. Those suppliers, again, go across PCBs, distribution, semiconductors, passive components, etc. And we've got 6 individuals that do nothing but develop and maintain the relationships we have with those core suppliers. The selection of those suppliers is based on the markets, the customers, the applications, the technology that either they're selling to us or we can incorporate into customer products. We're trying to look at that relationship a little bit differently as well, look out a bit further, rather than thinking about what's happening in the next 90 days. What's happening in the next 3 years? Where are you going to make your investments? Where potentially are you looking to sell off part of your company, shrink your portfolio, etc.? So really trying to get more in tune with that supplier strategy and work with them to develop what we call a co-developed account plan that's going to steer us forward. Again, not just the next 90 days, but thinking 3 years, 5 years out. So it's a little bit of a differentiator, I think, especially in the EMS type market, or as we like to call ourselves, a manufacturing solutions provider. And then the other couple of functions, the centralized quotes team there to support, a lot of the requirements that we have from a procurement perspective. We think about pricing, lead times, all of that information has to be refreshed every 90 days. As we go into negotiations, or as we try and understand what's happening as far as supply, we could start to see some trends happening where lead times are starting to creep up. That could be an early indication that there's an allocation kind of mode come into effect, and using that data to help drive the outputs that we need from that supply base. And then the procurement team, centralized procurement team, this was something that we put together really to make the complexity of dealing with Jabil a little simpler. We have 100 manufacturing locations, like I said, we're in 30 different countries. And, for some suppliers, that's just a complexity that's very difficult to deal with. And we created a centralized organization where the suppliers would receive purchase orders from one location, they would ship to one location, and we would pay them from one location. And it took a ton of the complexity out. It enabled us to scale a lot of suppliers, especially in Asia, way quicker than it would if we had to onboard them across, those 100 different locations. So it's there as an efficiency gain, but it's one of these models that over the years is just growing and growing. And the suppliers who are in that model really, truly appreciate it. And, it will continue to grow over the forthcoming years.
I can imagine they're loving it, yeah. Getting rid of complexity.
They do, yes.
What kind of pain points are you coming across, Graham, in your organization? And, how are you addressing them?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a difficult couple of years. We've obviously had the challenges of the semiconductor market. It's not just been semiconductors, but, the headlines have been about semiconductors. Even get into a car dealership in the last couple of years and talk to them about vehicles for sale. And, I start to get lectured on, well, I can't get semiconductors and therefore we can't sell cars. And, it's became something that's been very easy over the last couple of years to talk to, because it was so damaging, and everybody was feeling the effect of it. But right now, the biggest challenge we have is the complexity. We're facing unprecedented complexity when we think about the market and the supply of components. And on one hand, where we're still chasing shortages, we still have parts that we can't get, and on the other hand, we have excess of components that we now don't really need. We see suppliers making massive bets and investment in capacity, and we see other suppliers now starting to pull back. So the complexity that we face today is like I said, it's a little bit unprecedented. It's difficult for procurement organizations like the one that I'm fortunate to manage to really strike that balance and make sure that they're ticking all the boxes that's required from that function. How do you have a conversation with a supplier about pricing and cost when at the same time you're carrying too much material and you're trying to cancel orders? It becomes a difficult situation. So there's all this balancing that's having to go on in the conversations. And, what we find is that, the more information, the more data that we have to arm our practitioners, that the more informed we are, the easier those conversations become. And, that's something that, I think Jabil as an organization, we have a right to play in this kind of market intelligence field. We deal with 400 of the biggest brands in the world. Like I mentioned, we cross 10 or 11 different market sectors. We are quoting 1 million part numbers a quarter. We have a lot of information. We have a lot of data, and we have experts in the commodities and categories that they manage. So, going to market, explaining what's going on through commodity intelligence, category intelligence, or even market sector intelligence. It's an area where we feel that we definitely have a right to play.
Okay. And all this data that you're collecting, do you have some kind of a internal platform that you've generated yourselves to collate this data and to then give you, analytics, or intelligence based on it?
Yeah. So we developed a number of years ago a platform called our Procurement Intelligence Platform, or PIP for short. And, that's been a platform that I've been a part of since day one. I'm extremely proud of the platform. I was a commodity manager myself, so I knew all the pain points when I was negotiating with suppliers, trying to create stories around why they should look after, the commodity that I'm managing, the spend that I'm managing. Why would the supplier give me something that they wouldn't give somebody else? I'm trying to help build out that story. So, internally we developed this platform. We had so many, honestly, we had so many disparate systems. It was really hard to get everything onto one page. And we really wanted to create, a 360-degree view of every part, every supplier, every manufacturer that we have within our ecosystem. Give those practitioners the information that they require to really create an effective negotiation. And yeah, it's been a labor of love. Managing all that data is difficult, as I'm sure many of your followers know. If you don't manage that data initially from day one, it doesn't really matter how good the solution is that you've developed. And, we're fortunate enough within Jabil that we're on a single instance of ERP. We manage our data extremely well. We have, commodity classifications, hierarchies created. It just makes things like spend analytics, for example, extremely simple to do.
Yeah. A single instance of an ERP across 100 manufacturing locations. That's impressive.
Yes, it's definitely helped, the growth of the company over the last 50 plus years, having that single instance, giving us a view into each of the different manufacturing locations. Even if we think about the last 2 years, Tom, where we could have inventory sitting in a site that is required in another site.
Yeah.
And we have visibility to that, and it makes things a bit easier when we're thinking about smoothing out demand. But when you don't, you're then reliant on picking up the phone or checking another solution, and that's something that we've been very disciplined with over the last number of decades, and it will continue to help us as we go forward, because everybody knows that data is going to be highly valuable, and in fact more valuable than it is today into the future, especially as we think about some of the advancements in AI, etc.
So, Graham, what kind of trends are you seeing in the industry at the moment, with commodities, etc.? They, just that. What kind of trends are you seeing at the moment in the industry?
Yeah, I mean, again, thinking about the kind of major categories, on the PCB side of thing, we're seeing an abundance of supply. There's excess capacity out there. There's a lot of conversation around, China plus one type strategies. How do we find a supply base that's perhaps not as reliant on China? I think from memory, 95% of all PCBs come from China. So there's a big push for other locations in Southeast Asia, and primarily Southeast Asia, in order to support that kind of China plus one strategy. So that's definitely a trend on the PCB side. Semiconductors, that's the difficult one. We're certainly seeing a kind of pull back a little bit on the longer term investments that were promised over the last couple of years. When we had all these shortages, everybody was starting to talk about, well, we're making fabs in the US, we're talking about fabs in Europe, and starting to see people just tap the brakes a little bit there. There are exceptions to that rule. There's a couple of US-based semiconductor manufacturers that are continuing with their fab expansion plans, and
right.
I think they're going to be in a really good spot in a couple of years when we think about the momentum that we will obviously see with electronics. Content's only going to grow, EV requirements are just going to grow, ADAS, etc. There is going to be no let up in semiconductor demand, but right now we're seeing that tapping of the brakes, which is it's a little bit disappointing. Maybe some of the CFOs are starting to, start to ring the bell and say, hey guys, if we don't have the orders coming in, if we don't have the throughput, then let's tap the brakes. So that's a little concerning, because any kind of uptick in demand is going to create the same volatility that we saw over the last couple of years.
Kind of a bullwhip effect, yeah, because
yeah, for sure. It's
not like you can stand up a semiconductor fabrication facility, a fab. You can't stand one of those up in 6 to 8 weeks. It's
no,
what is it, 3-4 years at least to put one in place?
Yeah, I mean, I think with the complexity involved now, you're probably looking at 4.5 to 5 years. We actually met with one of the key suppliers yesterday, and I had actually made the same point as you, and they quickly corrected me and said our existing experience tells us it's closer to 4.5 to 5 years. So
Wow.
again, that's a little alarming when we think out and we look at the investments that are being made and we think about where the demand's going to come from. We know it's going to happen, but the capacity is just not going to be there. So it's certainly a huge question mark over the future of the semiconductor supply in the coming years.
Yeah, and to your point, the demand is only going to increase because if I look around the room here now,
Yeah.
if I look at the two lights I have pointed at me, they're Wi-Fi enabled LED lights, so I
There
can
you go.
control them from the computer. So they have semiconductors in them. My phone, obviously, the overhead fan, same kind of thing. Obviously the laptop, the soundboard, the microphone, the screen, everything around me. I have a Bluetooth keyboard over there. Literally everything. Our toaster in the kitchen is going on the blink at the moment because it's a so-called smart toaster. It's not very smart, but it's not one of these old mechanical ones where you had the timer that you dialed it across to set
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
time for your toaster. No, it's a slightly more smart one, and of course, what that means now is because that's breaking down, there's no repair for that, so we're going to have
Going to have to go and buy another one.
exactly. So
Yeah.
we're getting into rights to repair, and that's a whole nother story. But yeah, no, everything is becoming smart. The price of smarts and connectivity is falling every single day. So everything is becoming smarter. Everything is having, semiconductors built in. So the demand is only going one direction. So a pause in the development of these fabs, given the 4.5 to 5 year timescale to roll one out, is going to be problematic in 3-4 years. No.
Yeah, no, for sure. And again, that's a great part about working for a company like Jabil. We're fortunate enough to deal with the 400 biggest brands or 400 of the biggest brands in the world, and we have access to a lot of their roadmaps. Try to understand where the development is being made. What our product's going to look like in the future. We also get involved in designing some of those products, and you just look at the content, and the content of semiconductors, even on existing products, is only going to grow. So you've got new products that are using semiconductors. You've got existing products that the content is increasing in those products, and just looking out, if the industry grows at 3 or 4% CAGR, some of these semiconductor requirements in some of these end markets are going to grow by 10 and 12 and 15 and 20% CAGR, and I just don't know that we're going to be in a spot in 2 or 3 years where we can all sit back and say we can get the parts we need. There's not going to be any automotive issues, lot issues. There's going to be enough cars there that we can sell. It's just not going to happen like that unless these companies start to look at the longer term, and perhaps maybe even from a procurement or supply chain perspective, we think a bit longer term. We tend to the human element starts to come into play a lot when you're in allocation type situations. You need 100 parts, you order 200 so that you can get 50% of what is due to you. You get what you actually need. And, I guess there's a lot of companies right now that are experiencing the flip side of that, where, they perhaps ordered more in order to get what they need. And they now have excess inventory. They now have non-cancelable orders, and it becomes a massive drain on free cash flow.
Yeah. And given the amount of data that you have, is that something that you're sharing with others in order to help them?
Yeah. So again, we use it primarily internally, but over the course of the past 12 months, we believe we have a right to play in selling some of that market intelligence. Right. We've built a portal that external customers can sign up for. They can register for that, and they get access to lead time trends, what we see happening with supply generally. We give them pricing information as far as what we see happening relative to the market going up, market coming down. We give that information at a commodity level. We also do it at a category level on the indirect side. So looking at things like contingent labor, it could be CapEx, etc. So We look at it from both a direct and indirect side, and then we also have a market view as well. What does Jabil see happening in automotive and transportation? What do we see happening in the consumer space? What do we see happening in digital healthcare? And we give that perspective as well, which is maybe less data driven, but it's more insights around how we view those markets.
Okay, can you give me some kind of examples of where you've been able to use that data to help customers?
Yeah, I mean, we absolutely use that data every day with our existing customers. We help them understand where we see potential supply risk. We help them understand where they need to shift from a technology perspective in order to capitalize on one, more availability, and two, it could be a more competitive answer than the solution they're currently using. And it could be adding new suppliers. It could be reviewing technology, shifting away from an existing source, bringing in a second source, but also looking at, what do they need to do from a footprint perspective? Do they need to change from one type of semiconductor to another? The data helps us with that. We've got, as I mentioned before, we're basically pricing 1 million part numbers every quarter. And from that perspective, we get a good sense of where pricing is trending. We've got a great history. We've got over 20 years worth of pricing intelligence. If we need to go back in it, I think the relevancy of that, it obviously changes over time. But, even if you just consider the last 3 years where we've seen a ton of volatility in pricing, we're starting to see really good price trends emerge, and we've got a good sense of where it's going to head. So that's helpful to existing customers. I think if we think of new customers who are coming in to look at the market intelligence as a feature for them, just getting a sense of where we believe supply chain risk is going to occur in the future is going to be helpful for them. It will help them with new product design. There's a ton of technology type information in there as well. We talk a lot about staying away from legacy type components unless you choose the right supplier. If you don't choose the right supplier, and we go into that in detail, then you're going to be a customer that perhaps is not a focused customer. It happened a lot in the last couple of years where suppliers were very focused in supporting those customers that were following their technology roadmaps and explaining that to perhaps smaller customers that don't get access to the direct semiconductor manufacturers, the passive manufacturers directly. They're relying on a third party to help support them. Giving them that type of feedback has been extremely useful over the last couple of years. And I believe that if I think of some of these smaller OEM types or even small design houses, maybe even some small EMS, that's where the market intelligence that we have currently within Jabil could really help them and make sure that they have a more resilient supply chain, they have a more cost-effective supply chain.
Okay, and what has the feedback been from customers from this?
Yeah, the feedback's been good so far. We also offer other different types of supply chain services. So we will have commodity managers sit with customers, talk to them about what we see. Like I mentioned before, we have experts in these commodities and categories, and that's certainly a service we would offer. We have other types of services as well around procurement services, supply chain services, logistics services. But purely in the market intelligence side, the feedback has been really, really positive around how it's helping them and enable them create more resilient supply chains. And to be honest, I think if you did some kind of word cloud over the internet in the last 3 years, supply chain resiliency is probably going to be the big one right in the middle, right? So it's certainly been something that the feedback's been positive on, and it's going to help them as they build their products moving forward.
Sure. It's fascinating, Graham, because most organizations, I mean, I'm 350 something episodes into this podcast at this point, and talked to a lot of supply chain experts and a lot of executives. And this is not a kind of a story I've come across before where people have taken their supply chain knowledge and exposed it to customers and partners. You're turning what a lot of organizations see as a cost center for the business, which is supply chain, and turning it into an actual sales organization, for want of a better term, you're into a standalone business of its own. So what was the genesis behind that thought? What made you think this is a good idea? It's obviously a good idea, but what brought that to your mind? How did you wake up one morning and think this is what we should be doing?
Yeah, to be honest, Tom, we've been doing it for 20 plus years, and the feedback that we had from our manufacturing customers was that the intelligence and the insights that we were providing them was, it's an old term, but best in class, right? I mean, and we thought about that, and we thought, okay, obviously we've got our customers that are, as I mentioned before, 400 of the biggest brands in the world, and if we're getting that feedback, then it's almost demonstrating that we have a right to play in that market intelligence space, or supply chain services if we think about the umbrella. So yeah, it was really the feedback that we had from our existing customers on what we were offering and providing them as part of the overall Jabil service that we thought, okay, this is something that's, there's clearly a market for. And let's go and develop a strategy around that. Let's see what we can do as far as building out a sales organization. And probably most importantly, and I'm sure if there's any of Jabil's customers listening to this right now, they'll want to hear this, but let's make sure it's not distracting the procurement team from what they actually do, right? So, as much as we all play a part in the development of the intelligence and the reports, etc., we've always done that, and we'll always continue to do that. But we're not really out there selling this, right? So we have a separate organization that helps with that. But it really comes down to the fact that, we've built these programs over the last 20 years. We feel that, a kind of build by practitioner for practitioners approach really does work.
Good. We're coming towards the end of the podcast now, Graham. Is there any question I haven't asked that you wish I had, or any aspect of this we haven't touched on that you think it's important for people to be aware of?
Yeah, maybe one quick one, Tom. If anybody does want to learn a little bit more about what we're doing from a services perspective, supply chain or procurement services, then it's a simple enough link to find. Just go to jabil.com. Under services, you'll see supply chain and procurement, and there's a lot more detail there on what we have as an offering. If I move away from the services a second and go back to the market, I just think people have to be cognizant of what's going on out there. There's a lot of short-term actions getting taken right now that could have some longer-term implications, and try and understand what's going on, look at the bigger picture, think about the future, and the future being 2 years out, 3 years out, 4 years out, not 2 quarters out. There's a lot of actions that are being taken that I think are very short-term, and smaller OEMs, EMS, whoever it may be, they need to make sure they're not caught out by what could be boiling away in the future. So it's listen to what's happening out there, talk to people, talk to suppliers, talk to manufacturers, get a sense of what's going on, and try and take that kind of broader perspective on, where the challenges are going to lie in the future.
Cool. You've kind of preempted my last question, but I'll ask it anyway. If people want to know more about yourself or about any of the things we discussed in the podcast today, where would you have me direct them?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn. So if anybody wants to look me up on LinkedIn, it's just under Graham Scott. If you look under Jabil, you'll see me there. We've got different blogs out there and videos as well, so you can see and hear from me there. And again, just from a services perspective, jabil.com is where you'll get most of the information about what we offer and what we can do.
Cool. And I'll put those links in the show notes as well. Graham, that's
Appreciate
been fantastic. Really interesting. Thanks a million for coming on the podcast today.
No worries. Thank you.